The first sound that ever truly belonged to me was the slow, groaning churn of ancient sarcophagus walls sealing shut around my broken body. It was a sound that seemed to echo not through metal alone, but through the remnants of a life I half remembered and half feared to reclaim. Before that moment, pain had been my world. After it, duty became my eternity. Yet between them lay a single breath, a moment when the cold light of the infirmarium met my failing eyes, and I realized this was not salvation. It was conscription into a second existence that the living whispered about only in reverence or dread. For in the Imperium of man, nothing dies that can still serve, and nothing rests that can still kill. I remember the distant hymn of tech marines, the harsh incense of unguents burning under servo arms, the faint tremors of the strike cruiser shifting through the void. I remember the knowledge that the Emperor required more from me than my flesh could give, and so I was given a shell of iron, a tomb of ceramite, a prison of honor, and thus began the existence of a dreadnought. The galaxy has no mercy for memory. What fragments remain of who I once was cling to me like embers in a storm, flaring without warning, fading without forgiveness. I feel them burning as the sarcophagus awakens and dormant systems hum with their pitiless rhythm. Somewhere, in the flicker of failing human recollection, I know I once stood beneath the open sky, felt rain on my face, laughed with brothers whose voices I can barely recall. Now I hear thunder only from within, the pulse of reactors and the deep thrum of weapons systems eager to roar. The machine does not feel wind or warmth, or the gentle light of an unfiltered sun. The machine feels only war, and through it, so do I. If you wish to walk beside me through this half-life of steel and memory, drifting between the echoes of the warrior I was and the monstrous silhouette I have become, then lend your strength to this chronicle. Let your fifth voice join ours by leaving your mark upon this journey. Share it, shape it, follow it, so these fragments of recollection may reach others lost in the endless war. I remember the light first, not because it was gentle, but because it was the last unfiltered glow my mortal eyes ever saw. It slanted across the infirmarium like a blade, carving through the shadowed haze of incense and chem smoke that curled along the ceiling in slow, mournful ribbons. I lay beneath that fractured radiance, unable to move, my breathing shallow and uneven, though even then, I could no longer tell how much of that breath was mine and how much belonged to the machines that hissed and clicked around me with clinical indifference. The scent of unguents clung to the air with a cloying sweetness that failed to mask the metallic tang of open wounds and scorched flesh. Somewhere nearby, servo arms adjusted their ministrations with patient precision, aligning the last of the tubes that fed into my ruined form. And, behind it all, as constant as the hum of the strike cruiser's plasma drives, rose the low, resonant chanting of the tech marines who had come to oversee my transition from warrior to something else entirely. I could not yet understand the shape of that future. Pain had blurred too many thoughts, smudging the edges of memory until only instinct remained. There had been a battlefield, yes. There had been fire and howling warp winds and the clash of blades so close I could feel the heat of my enemy's breath even through the filters of my helm. My brothers' voices had filled the voxnet with cries of warning, of valor, of dying oaths that carried a weight I could no longer hold on to. Somewhere in the midst of that carnage I had fallen, perhaps struck by a blow, perhaps crushed beneath the ruin of a collapsing hab block, perhaps simply overtaken by the cumulative toll of wounds ignored for too long. It is strange, the mind's way of choosing what to preserve. I no longer remember the exact moment my body failed, but I remember the instant I realized I could not stand again. That knowledge lingered now like a bitter seed lodged behind my ribs. I could feel it growing with every beat of the medical machines that kept forced life surging through me. I was alive because others had decreed it so. Alive because I remained useful. Alive because the Imperium demands service even beyond the limits of human endurance. A shadow passed across my failing vision, and I felt the faint tremor of heavy boots around the plasteel bed. Someone was speaking in a low, deferential tone. Another answered in a voice that held a cold, methodical certainty. I tried to focus, but my senses wavered, splintering between awareness and a creeping numbness that pulled me deeper into myself. My limbs felt distant, unresponsive. My chest rose and fell with mechanical insistence. My world had narrowed to light, sound, and the steady countdown of a life that no longer belonged to me. Above me, the looming silhouette of a tech marine stepped forward, his red armor marked with glyphs of the Omnissiah, his servo harness bristling with instruments of iron and purpose. He regarded me with the impassive gaze of someone who saw not a dying warrior but a component approaching final integration. His words were soft and reverent, yet stripped of sentiment. "Brother," he murmured, "your service does not end here." Another figure approached, broader, more imposing, wrapped in the solemn black of a chaplain whose very presence pressed upon my dimming mind like the weight of a cathedral vault. His crozius hung at his side, its head shaped into a skull that seemed to judge the worth of my lingering breath. He placed a gauntleted hand upon my brow, and though I felt nothing of its physical weight, I sensed the gravity of his intent. "You will endure," he intoned, voice echoing as though delivered from within a cavern. "Your duty continues, sanctified by sacrifice. Where the flesh falters, steel shall carry you. Where memory dims, purpose will guide you. Fear not the darkness that approaches, for the Emperor has need of you still." The words washed over me, not soothing but final, like the closing of a great book whose last page had already been read. I felt the faint stirrings of protest somewhere within my fading humanity. I wanted to speak, to ask if this was truly the only path left, but my tongue was heavy and unresponsive. The machines whispered for me instead. My bed shuddered, locks disengaged, gurney rails unfolded. I was being moved, not gently, not cruelly, but with the efficient inevitability of a ceremony performed countless times. Figures in red and black robes glided beside me as my broken body was borne toward a chamber deeper within the cruiser's belly. I could sense their reverence, though it was not for me but for the ancient machine awaiting my arrival, the Dreadnought sarcophagus. My vision dimmed in and out as we traveled, through the twisting corridors, passing through doors inscribed with sigils of warning and devotion. The air grew colder, denser, saturated with the scent of sacred oils and ionized metal. The distant roar of the ship seemed to quiet as though in anticipation. When at last my gurney halted, the world came into focus with sudden, startling clarity. The sarcophagus stood before me like the open maw of a giant carved from obsidian and steel. Runes glowed faintly along its inner frame, their circuitry pulsing with restrained energy. Thick cables unfurled like tendrils, humming with the dormant heartbeat of a slumbering beast. The machine spirit within it was ancient, older than many worlds, older than most records, older than the memory of those who had first bound it to service. Even in its dormancy, I could feel its presence, vast and patient, like a thunderstorm waiting beyond the horizon. A cold shiver ran through me, or perhaps it was simply the ghost of a sensation from a body that scarcely held any feeling left. Either way, I knew I was staring at my fate. The tech marines moved with renewed purpose. Servo arms adjusted angles, mag locks clamped into place, and the gurney lifted me toward the sarcophagus with hydraulic finality. I tried once more to speak, to question, to refuse, but my strength had vanished like water through broken fingers. I could only watch as the chaplain stepped closer, his skull helm reflecting the dim, flickering lights. He raised his crozius in benediction. "Brother," he said, voice low and resonant, "know that your sacrifice is not the extinguishing of a flame, but its elevation. Through this burden, you will become an eternal warrior. Through this tomb, you will rise once more to defend the Imperium." As he spoke, I felt the first cold touch of the sarcophagus cradle against my back. Metal kissed ravaged flesh with frightening tenderness. I was lowered inside, my form aligning with the intricate interfaces that would replace nerves, organs, and sinew. The interior was narrow, suffocating, lined with conduits and harnesses that embraced me like the ribs of some monstrous beast. I could feel the machine reaching for me even before its systems awakened fully, as though it recognized the presence of a new occupant and was eager to bind me into its design. A tech marine's voice echoed from somewhere above my dimming sight. "Integration begins." Something pierced the base of my skull, sharp, cold, invasive. I would have screamed if my lungs had obeyed. More connections followed, sliding through flesh and bone like icy serpents. Pain flared bright and brief, then dissolved into a numbness so profound it felt like drowning. The sarcophagus walls began to draw inward as locking clamps secured my position. I felt them closing, sealing, enclosing. There was no escape. There was no turning back. Somewhere, alarms chirped in muted approval. My every remaining breath condensed in the chilled air of the chamber before being swallowed by the enclosing dark. I felt my arms go rigid as mechanical restraints aligned them with activation nodes. My legs were immobilized by armored braces. The sensation was neither of restraint nor support. It was simply the feeling of disappearing into something larger and utterly indifferent to my former humanity. The chaplain's voice wove through the narrowing space like the final thread of a tapestry. Remember this moment, brother, not for yourself, but for those who will walk in your shadow and draw strength from the echo of your deeds. The walls slid closer. The world dimmed further. My heart struggled, then steadied under the machine's command. My blood cooled. My senses flickered like candles in a storm. I felt as though I were drifting between worlds, one dying, the other awakening. "Seal the sarcophagus," the tech marine intoned. The command fell like a hammer. The lid descended. Darkness swallowed me whole. For a heartbeat, an impossibly fragile heartbeat that felt more like a memory than a physical act, I remained suspended in the void. I could hear the faintest whisper of my own thoughts, scattered and trembling. I tried to cling to them, tried to hold on to the sound of rain on armor from some forgotten world, tried to grasp at the image of my brothers standing beside me, faces blurred but voices strong, tried to remember the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the feel of soil beneath my boots, the smell of promethium and distant pine forests after a night of victory, but the machine was whispering too. A low rumble at first, like tectonic plates shifting far beneath the earth, then a pulse, heavy and rhythmic, aligning itself with what remained of my failing heartbeat. Then a steady drone that pressed against my mind like a tide rolling in from the horizon. It did not speak in words, it spoke in intent, in demand, in hunger. It wanted to awaken, it wanted to fight, it wanted to live again through me. I felt my consciousness lurch as neural connections flared to life, one after another, like constellations igniting across a night sky. Data surged, sensory feeds spiked. My vision dissolved into spirals of light and shadow. The hum of the sarcophagus grew louder, resonating through my bones, though I wondered if I still truly had bones at all. A voice, a new voice, cold and synthetic, spoke from deep within the machine. Not a machine spirit's raw instinct, but the ship's systems reporting the transition. Vital signs stabilized, host consciousness tethered, initial integration at 9% and climbing. 9%. I realized then how much more of the path remained. I wondered how much of myself would be left by 100. The tech marines outside chanted with increasing fervor, their hymns rising in layered harmonies that reverberated through the sarcophagus walls. The litany synchronized perfectly with the machine's awakening pulse, as though their voices were guiding the stoper, spirit within, coaxing it to merge with the fragment of humanity they had entombed. My mind reeled. Memories splintered and reformed, only to splinter again. The machine's steady rhythm pressed upon them, compressing, distorting, rearranging. I no longer knew which thoughts were mine and which were imposed by the merging process. All I could do was cling to whatever fragments I could grasp. My name. I tried to recall it. It slipped away. I reached for the memory of home, a world of mountains, forests, red deserts, blue oceans. It dissolved like smoke. I clung to the image of my brothers. That, at least, endured, faces blurred, armor gleaming, oaths shared in silent resolve. The machine pressed harder. 9% became 10, 10% became 11. My thoughts slowed, not because they were failing, but because they were being replaced, integrated, reforged. A sudden heaviness engulfed me as the sarcophagus fully sealed. I felt the last whisper of air escape, felt the final separation between the world I had known and the eternal night that awaited. When the locking clamps engaged with a shudder that shook my entire being, I realized with a hollow ache that the moment the sarcophagus closed was not when the machine claimed me. It was when I surrendered to it. As consciousness ebbed and returned in uneven waves, I felt the distant thrum of the strike cruiser reverberate through the Dreadnought's frame. The ship seemed to acknowledge its new inhabitant with a rumble of approval or perhaps indifference. Everything was colder now. Everything was quieter. For the first time, I wondered whether I had died after all. A final whisper rose in the fading space between thought and oblivion. I did not know if it came from my own mind or from the machine spirit settling into its long slumber beside me. Rest now. War will wake you soon. The first breath after rebirth is not a breath at all. It is a tremor, a distant vibration rippling through the abyss where thought lies dormant and time is undefined. For a long while, minutes, hours, years, there is no difference. Only the pulse of dim machinery humming in patient expectation. Only the slow rhythm of a slumbering giant awaiting command. I drifted in that dark ocean without direction, suspended between echoes of memory and the colder truth of mechanized existence. Sleep was not sleep as mortals know it. It was a vast, formless drift, devoid of dreams, devoid of sensation, devoid of anything that could be called comfort. It was simply nothing. Then something knocked upon that nothingness. A distant impact, a tremor through the vault floor, a faint surge of power whispering through dormant circuits. I felt it ripple along the edge of my consciousness like a hand brushing against glass from the other side. Another impact followed, then another. They pulsed in a rhythm, too irregular to be mechanical. It carried urgency, fear. The world outside was calling me. The sarcophagus stirred. For a moment, I did not understand what was happening. The transition from total darkness to flickering awareness was abrupt and disorienting, like being hurled upward from cold depths into blinding starlight. A sharp influx of data surged into my mind: temperature readings, atmospheric conditions, vibration analysis, the faint chorus of error runes blinking into existence as long-dormant systems shuddered awake. My thoughts lagged behind, like a man rising too quickly from a long sleep. I felt the machine spirit stretch in the depths of its housing, shaking off the dust of centuries or perhaps only days. Time had no meaning inside the coffin. It woke reluctantly, as though stirred by something it tolerated but did not respect. A growl reverberated through the armored frame around me, a basso hum that echoed like the roar of a caged beast. Then, through the haze of awakening, came a voice. Ancient, prepare for activation. Host consciousness confirmed. Power flow stable. Vox link initiating. It was the tone of a tech marine, crisp and steady, though tinged with something almost reverential. The words did not reach me through ears, those were long gone, but through a direct neural route that translated his speech into cold, comprehensible signals. I recognized the cadence. I recognized the authority. Yet the name he used for me, Ancient, felt strange, as though meant for someone else entirely. The machine spirit bristled at the intrusion of the outside world. I felt its displeasure surge like static along the neural filaments. This awakening was not voluntary. It had been summoned, compelled, dragged from the safety of slumber into the tumult of war. It growled again, this time louder, shaking the inner walls of the sarcophagus. Calm, the tech marine murmured. Your fury will be needed soon. Save it for the foe. His attempt at soothing the machine spirit did little. It snarled, its instincts flaring hot against my own rising awareness. For a heartbeat, if I still possessed one, I wondered who was the intruder here, the spirit or the man entombed within it. A surge of light flooded my vision. Not natural light, not sunlight or lumen strips or the warm glow of fire. This was a deluge of data feeds, tactical overlays, proximity scans, and icons flickering across my sight in a dizzying mosaic. They arranged themselves with sluggish reluctance as the sarcophagus completed its boot sequence. The vault around me resolved into a grainy image. Cold stone, heavy cables draped from the ceiling, the faint glow of incense braziers wafting curls of smoke over devotional murals. Then the vox crackled again, sharper this time. Ancient, systems at 40%. Continue cognitive ascent. We require you. Require. A word that once carried meaning. Now it merely signaled another burden I had no strength to refuse. Despite the weight of lethargy dragging at my mind, I felt the demand coil around me like a chain being drawn taut. Another tremor rocked the vault. Debris fell from above, scattering against my armor in faint pings that echoed louder inside the sarcophagus. The machine spirit surged to full alertness, snarling with unmistakable eagerness. It recognized the language of war more clearly than any spoken order. My vision sharpened. External audio feeds unmuted. Gunfire. Not the contained crack of training rounds. Not the distant thud of artillery drills. This was the raw, chaotic clamor of real battle, resonating through stone and steel. Shouts echoed in the corridors beyond, punctuated by screams abruptly cut short. I recognized the timbre of bolter fire, my bolter fire from warriors clad in power armor fighting for every inch of ground outside the vault. Something massive struck the vault door, denting it inward with a metallic groan. My awakening accelerated. Power surged through, dormant conduits. Hydraulic pistons flexed, servo muscles tensed like clenched fists. The weight of my limbs returned to me, heavy and immense, but no longer inert. I felt my right arm twitch within its housing, followed by the deep rumble of the assault cannon mounted beneath it, spinning momentarily in test rotation, hungry for validation. The Tech Marine's voice rang out again, louder to rise above the din. "Ancient, you must rise. The enemy breaches the inner sanctum. We cannot hold them without you." The machine spirit roared its agreement. And in that moment, I felt it the first undeniable tug of shared purpose between myself and the entity that filled the iron around me. It was not harmony, not unity, merely an overlap of intent, survival through destruction, duty through violence, purpose through fire. I pushed. My first attempt to move was akin to lifting a mountain with trembling hands. The sarcophagus resisted, its systems warming slowly after long stillness. Pistons screamed, joints groaned. The vault trembled around me, but the motion came. I felt the ground shift beneath my massive weight as I rose, centimeter by agonizing centimeter, until the cradle restraints disengaged with a hiss. Darkness fell away as the activation protocols triggered fully. I stood. The sensation was alien beyond words. I towered over the Tech Marines, over the vault sigils, over everything I once knew. Every movement carried seismic weight. Every shift of mass rippled through the stone beneath my feet. The ground felt fragile, the air thin. The vault suddenly seemed too small, too confining, as though it could not possibly contain the force I had become. The Tech Marine stepped back, his posture rigid with respect. Systems at 70%, weapon feed stable, machine spirit contained. Contained was an exaggeration. The spirit pulsed with barely restrained fury, straining at its boundaries like a chained predator scenting blood. Yet I felt it now not as an intruding force, but as something I shared space with, an echo of instinct intertwined with my own battered consciousness. Another thunderous blow landed against the vault door. The thick ceramite buckled inward with a resounding crack. Sparks showered from the hinges. I detected the heat signature of multiple hostile forms pressing against it, their movements frantic and violent. I stepped forward. The ground cracked beneath the weight of my armored stride. Each footfall reverberated through the vault like a drumbeat heralding a storm. My assault cannon hummed to life, its barrels spinning in a steady, hungry rhythm. The heavy flamer mounted upon my other arm warmed with a low hiss, releasing the faint scent of promethium that seeped into the recycled air. The Tech Marine spoke again, his tone quickening with urgency. "Ancient, enemy forces, identified as Xenos Orcs, breaching the sanctum. You must." He never finished. The vault door burst inward. A tide of green-skinned brutes surged through the breach in a thunderous wave of muscle, tusks, and crude armor plates hammered together from scavenged scrap. Their roars filled the chamber with primal fury. Their crude weapons glinted in the dim light. They had fought their way deep into the strike cruiser, too deep, and now sought to drown the heart of the vessel in blood. They found me instead. The machine spirit exulted. Before conscious thought could catch up, I acted. The assault cannon blazed, filling the confined space with a deafening roar as explosive shells tore through the front ranks of orcs, shredding flesh and bending metal with equal indifference. Bodies flung backward, disintegrating mid-air. Green limbs and broken weapons clattered across the vault floor. The flamer roared next, releasing a torrent of searing fire that engulfed the left flank of the invading mob. Their screams were lost in the crackling inferno. Even as I fired, I felt the recoil shudder through my entire frame. It was like remembering strength I had forgotten I once possessed. Each blast shook the remnants of sleep from my mind. Each gout of flame seared away the lingering haze of disorientation. I was awake, entirely, fully, and war greeted me like an old companion. More orcs crashed through the breach, heedless of their fallen, driven by rage and instinct. They hurled themselves at me with wild abandon, swinging cleavers and chains wrapped around jagged metal plates. Their blows landed against my armor with sparks and shrieking metal, but they were nothing less than nothing. My power fist swung, a single arc of kinetic force that crushed 3 of them into the wall with bone-pulverizing finality. Another leapt onto my chassis, hacking at my armor with desperate ferocity. I turned, slamming him into the ground so hard the stone split beneath his broken form. The machine spirit howled with triumph. For a moment, I felt an echo of that exhilaration, a flicker of something dangerously close to exultation. The sensation shocked me. I had known battle before, had known victory, fear, determination. But this was different. This was war delivered without hesitation, without fatigue, without pain. It was terrible. It was intoxicating. The tech marine shouted something behind me, but I barely heard it above the roar in my mind. The battle was over almost as soon as it had begun. The last of the orcs either fell under my weapons or fled back into the corridor, only to be cut down by bolter fire from my brothers regrouping beyond the breach. The vault grew still once more, the only sounds the hiss of cooling weapons and the distant echoes of ongoing conflict deeper within the vessel. I felt my systems begin to stabilize. Smoke drifted around me in thin coils. Blood, a grotesque mixture of orc ichor and the spilled lifeblood of fallen warriors, pooled at my feet. The tech marine approached cautiously, his movements reverent. "Ancient," he said, "you have saved us." Saved, a word that felt hollow in my new existence. There was no saving in war, only delaying the inevitable. Yet as I stood amid the ruin, towering above the wreckage of battle, I realized something unsettling. For all the horror of this new half-life, for all the loss of who I once was, for all the weight of this iron tomb, I was not powerless, I was not weak, I was not broken, I was a weapon, and the galaxy would tremble beneath my steps. There is a silence that follows war, a silence so dense it almost feels like weight. It settles over the battlefield long after the last shell has detonated and the final scream has faded into memory. It presses upon wreckage and wounded alike, a reminder that violence is but a moment, while its consequences linger like ash caught in the lungs. When the fighting ceased aboard the strike cruiser, I felt that silence wrap itself around me within the vault, cold and heavy, as tech marines moved through the aftermath with ritualistic precision. They murmured blessings over fallen brothers. They collected fragments of shattered armor. They tended to scorched circuitry and broken icons. And somewhere in that dimly lit sanctum, beneath the lingering scent of promethium and charred metal, they regarded me with expressions I could not decipher. To them, I was both a savior and a relic. To myself, I was a contradiction that grew more unsettling with every passing moment. The machine spirit within my sarcophagus pulsed with residual agitation, its fury not fully spent. It disliked rest. It despised stillness. It wanted the roar of war, the pulse of its weapons unleashed, the exhilaration of purpose fulfilled. Its desires flickered faintly through my consciousness, like a second heartbeat, trying to sync with my own. When its anger rose, I felt heat crawl through my neural connections. When it quieted, the cold returned, oppressive and absolute. The tech marine overseeing me stepped forward, inspecting the deep gouges in my armor where orc cleavers had struck with reckless abandon. His voice was steady but softened with something like respect. "Your return to service is a blessing, Ancient. The chapter endures because its legends endure." Legend. The word struck me with unexpected force. Legends belonged to the dead, or to those whose stories had long surpassed the boundaries of flesh and mortality. I was neither dead nor alive. I was something caught between, a fragment of a warrior suspended in an iron tomb, pressing against the walls of memory and duty. When the tech marines finally completed their rites and withdrew, the vault grew quiet again. My vision dimmed as external systems were powered down. The world narrowed, folding inward like a shutter being drawn closed. I felt myself sinking into that familiar, suffocating stillness, into the half-death that awaited between battles. And slowly, inevitably, time began to blur. At first, I tried to hold on to my thoughts. I tried to recall faces, names, moments shaped by brothers whose laughter and fury had guided me through countless conflicts. I remembered standing shoulder to shoulder with warriors who wore the same heraldry upon their pauldrons. I remembered the weight of a bolt gun in my hands, the smell of ceramite burning under enemy fire. I remembered a world where I could walk freely beneath the sky, but each memory flickered like a candle in a windstorm. The sarcophagus dulled them, numbed them, pressed upon them with mechanical indifference. Sleep, or something like it, crept along the edges of my consciousness, pulling me downward into a dark, featureless expanse. There were no dreams, no sensations, only drifting. When I stirred again, the passage of time was impossible to measure. Seconds or months could have slipped through my grasp, without distinction. The vault lights were dimmer. The air smelled faintly of new incense, and voices echoed in the distance, distorted by chamber acoustics and the layers of metal surrounding me. "Reverence for the fallen," one voice murmured. "Preparation for the battles ahead," said another. I recognized neither. Their tones were youthful, newly initiated, perhaps, aspirants or neophytes performing rites under the guidance of their seniors. They spoke of names unfamiliar to me, warriors who had risen in rank since my entombment. They recited honors and glories from campaigns I did not remember, victories won after my last awakening. I felt something fracture in the dark recesses of my mind. Time had moved without me. My chapter had grown, fought, bled, and triumphed while I slept in my iron grave. Brothers I once knew had fallen in battles I would never see. Others rose to replace them, their deeds whispered through the sanctum in reverent tones. I tried to summon the faces of my original squad, those I had once fought beside, shared oaths with, bled alongside. Their features slipped through my grasp like water through armored fingers. I saw blurred outlines, vague shapes, voices that no longer aligned with the proper memories. The machine spirit stirred, sensing my agitation. It offered its own kind of comfort, not through calm, but through purpose. It whispered of war, of duty, of objectives clear and absolute. It promised clarity through violence, focus through battle, identity through destruction. And for a moment, a horrifying, fleeting moment, I understood why some dreadnoughts embraced the machine spirit more readily than their own fading humanity. At least the machine never doubted its purpose. My next awakening came with a jolt. Alarms blared, red lumen strips blinked furiously. The vault trembled under the shock of external impacts. The tech marines rushed toward me with urgency in their movements, chanting activation rites as though the words themselves might serve as reinforcement against the threat tearing through the ship. "Awaken, ancient. We require your strength once more." Power surged through my systems, pulling me violently from the depths of formless rest. My vision returned in harsh bursts. Sensory data flooded my mind. The machine spirit roared with pleasure at the return to motion. But something inside me recoiled. Each awakening was taking something from me. I could feel it, this subtle, corrosive erosion of the self. Memories once vibrant now felt brittle and indistinct. The voice I once recognized as my own grew faint, overshadowed by the mechanical rhythm of the sarcophagus and the predatory instincts of the machine spirit. When I activated fully and rose again, the battlefield before me had changed. A new war, a new enemy. A new generation of battle brothers moving with disciplined precision, their armor bearing markings and squad designations I had never seen before. They saluted me with awe, with reverence, with respect reserved for heroes whose deeds had surpassed their own lifetimes. But I did not recognize them, not one. The realization struck with a coldness more profound than the sarcophagus itself. War followed war. Time folded into itself like the pages of a chronicle I no longer understood. I would slumber, I would rise, I would kill, I would slumber again. Each cycle shaved away another layer of who I had once been. One awakening came after a battle so brutal the vault smelled of cordite and blood for days. The chaplain visited me then, his steps slow and measured, He approached my immobile form and placed a hand upon my armored sarcophagus. "You remain steadfast, ancient," he said softly. "Though centuries pass, your duty endures." Centuries. The word reverberated through me like a seismic shock. Had it been so long? Had I truly drifted through so many cycles of sleep and war that the man inside this tomb no longer shared the same century as his birth? The chaplain spoke again, as though sensing my unrest. "Do not mourn the passing of time. It is the fate of all dreadnoughts to outlast their mortal kin. What you lose in memory, you gain in service. The Emperor remembers what you cannot." His words were meant as comfort, but they felt like a verdict. When he left, the vault returned to its oppressive silence. I drifted again, thoughts fraying like worn parchment. I tried to remember my name, not the honorifics bestowed upon the sarcophagus, not the title of ancient given to the construct I had become. My true name. The name I had once spoken as a child, long before I joined. The chapter, long before I earned the right to wear its colors. It would not come. The machine spirit pulsed with smug satisfaction. It cared nothing for names. It cared for purpose. It cared for continuity of function. It cared for war. Sleep dragged me downward again, swallowing me whole. When next I stirred, I found the faint echo of a memory slipping through the cracks, my hand resting on the shoulder of a fellow warrior as we knelt together at the edge of a cliff, watching the sun rise over a world whose name I could not remember. His voice was deep, warm, laced with familiarity. "Brother," he had said, "we endure because we must, not because we wish to." That voice was precious, important. It belonged to someone who had once shaped me, once fought beside me with unwavering loyalty. I clung to it desperately, but when I tried to recall his face, it dissolved into mist. Despair seeped inward, heavy and cold. And for the first time since my entombment, I wondered if slumber was not merely rest, but decay. The slow disintegration of the man I had been, replaced piece by a hollow echo that existed only for the next activation. The machine spirit did not share my grief. It whispered not of loss, but of inevitability. Its voice grew stronger with each cycle, more insistent, more confident, more present. A day came, if days still held meaning, when I awoke not to battle, but to a simple test of systems, a recalibration, a maintenance rite. Tech Marines surrounded me, adjusting conduits and reblessing circuitry. They chanted praises to the Omnissiah and to the machine spirit, their liturgies reverberating through my armored frame. They thanked me for victories I did not remember. They honored battles I had no recollection of fighting. Their prayers named enemy forces I had never seen, and as they spoke, I realized with chilling clarity, the chronicle of my deeds now belonged to others. My memory was no longer the keeper of my legacy. Someone else carried the stories of who I had once been. I drifted again. This time, as the darkness rose to claim me, I felt something slipping, something vital, something irreplaceable. I tried to grasp it, but my mind was slow, my thoughts dulled by time and machinery. It escaped, and with that loss, I understood. I was fading, not dying. Dreadnoughts do not die unless destroyed, but fading into something not entirely human, not entirely machine, something suspended in the uneasy void between. As the sarcophagus grew still around me once more, I clung to one final truth. The next awakening would come, and when it did, I feared there might be even less of me left to greet it. There are places within a strike cruiser where even war hesitates to intrude. Deep in the heart of the vessel, past bulkheads reinforced with adamantium and sanctified inscriptions, lies the dim twilight of the reclusium vaults and maintenance sancta, those quiet, unnerving spaces where dreadnoughts are tended between deployments. It is a realm of echoing footfalls and whispered litanies, the air heavy with the mingled scent of incense, sacred oils, and the cold musk of dormant machine spirits. Time passes strangely here. Moments stretch and contract without warning, as though the very fabric of the ship bends in deference to the ancient giants kept within its armored womb. It was here that I lay in uneasy slumber after a campaign whose details had already begun to slip from my grasp. The sarcophagus was dark, my senses muted to a thin pulse of distant awareness, barely more than a flicker of light in a sea of formless black. I had grown used to this half-existence, the silent, drifting through memory and nothingness. But something stirred me long before the tech marines intended. Voices, soft, hushed, reverent shadows of sound that reached inward through the cocoon of slumber. At first, I thought them echoes of my own fractured memories, perhaps remnants of some long-forgotten battle brother whispering through the haze of fading identity. But these voices were external, their tones shifting through the sanctum, occasionally bouncing off metal walls in a manner that carried distinct cadence and personality. "Is he awake?" a young voice murmured. "Nervous, awestruck? No, he sleeps between wars. Do not fear him," replied an older voice, patient and certain. "Fear the day he opens his eyes." A faint jolt of awareness tugged at my consciousness. They spoke of me, or rather, they spoke of the machine I inhabited, as though the two were entirely separate entities. Perhaps they were not wrong. Steps approached, soft leather boots of junior initiates, the heavy tread of a veteran watching over them. I sensed their presence through the muted passive sensors, still active in my slumbering frame, faint ripples in the air shifting with every movement. Though my vision had not yet reactivated, the sensation was strangely clear, almost intimate. "Tell us again," the younger voice urged, "about the dreams." The older marine's pause was long enough to carry weight. "Some say the ancients dream of battle," he whispered. "They see wars from centuries past, reliving each moment until their awakening cleaves the illusion." A murmur of unease. "Others say the Emperor grants them visions," he continued, voice lowering. "Litanies speak of his light reaching even the deepest iron tombs, guiding the spirits of the interred in ways we cannot comprehend." I felt the faintest flutter in my dormant thoughts, like dust drifting through half-light. Visions? Dreams? I remembered none. Yet sometimes, in the hazy gulf between slumber and activation, I felt impressions, shapes without meaning, flickers of sensation without form, a rush of wind, a glint of gold, a voice so faint I could not discern whether it came from memory, hallucination, or something beyond either. The older marine exhaled softly, as though careful not to disturb the sanctity of the vault. "And some say the ancients hear us even now, that their minds sometimes drift closer to wakefulness than we realize." The initiates stiffened. A flicker of amusement, faint, distant, unexpected, stirred somewhere deep within the tangled remains of my human consciousness. If they feared waking me, the irony was profound. I feared my awakenings more than any of them ever could, but the whispers did not end. As they moved deeper into the sanctum, the conversation shifted, drifting through half-believed rituals and old stories recounted by chaplains and tech marines. Their words painted me not as a warrior trapped within a machine, but as a mythic figure whose every awakening marked a turning point in the chapter's campaigns. They spoke of a presence felt in the air when I stirred, a pressure upon the spirit, a quieting of distant machine hums as though the ship itself recognized me, rumors, superstition, or perhaps simple reverence. But as more voices joined theirs, tech marines conducting rites, serfs performing menial tasks, chaplains reciting liturgies, I realized these whispers were not isolated. They were part of a greater chorus, a tapestry of half-truths and speculation woven around the slumber of warriors like myself. Some spoke with awe, others with fear. He stirred during the last nocturne cycle. A tech marine murmured during one of the maintenance rites. His machine spirit growled, though no external threat was present. "The spirit is restless," another replied. "Perhaps the Omnissiah whispers to him, or perhaps the soul within shifts uneasily." The soul within. As though mine were a trapped creature struggling beneath layers of metal and sanctified circuitry. The tech marine continued his work, the whir of servo arms punctuating his litany. "One day, all that remains of his humanity will fade. The machine spirit will inherit what is left." A fresh ripple of unease quivered through my thoughts. Was that my fate? To be slowly devoured by the very thing sustaining me? Or were these only the fears of men who did not understand the bond between the sarcophagus and its occupant? A chaplain's deep voice resonated through the chamber a moment later, as though answering the unspoken question. "The machine spirit does not consume," he said firmly. "It guides, it strengthens. The warrior within remains. No matter how fragmented his memories become, the Emperor watches over them." A silence followed, thick and contemplative. Then he added, more quietly, "But even I have heard whispers from some of the oldest vaults, tales of ancients who murmur during slumber, whose machine spirits roar without reason, whose sarcophagi tremble with forces no techmarine can explain. Whether these are truths or superstitions, only the Emperor knows." I drifted, caught between opposing beliefs, none of which could fully assuage the sense of dissolution slowly eating away at me. Time continued its strange, elastic passage. The sanctum darkened, then brightened, then dimmed again. Rites were performed. Incense burned in ornate braziers. Techmarines attended to their work with meticulous precision. All the while, the whispers wove through the vault like tendrils of smoke. Rumors of dreadnoughts who awoke in the night with no summons. Legends of ancients who spoke in voices not their own. Tales of sarcophagi glowing faintly during deep slumber. One night, if night still held meaning aboard the ship, I stirred from a deep drift to the sound of two techmarines conversing beside my dormant form. Their tones were hushed, conspiratorial. "Did you see the runes flare?" "Yesterday," one whispered. "Just for a moment. It must have been a malfunction, perhaps. Or perhaps he was dreaming. You know as well as I do, they do not dream. Not as the living dream, no. But some say pieces of their memories bleed through into the machine spirit, forming echoes that cycle through their recesses. Fragments of war replaying endlessly behind closed armor. Fragments replaying endlessly." The phrase lingered with a chilling resonance. What if the glimpses of sensation I sometimes felt, wind, light, distant voices, were not visions or liturgical fantasies, but the shattered remains of memories looping endlessly, stripped of context? The second techmarine continued, his voice barely above a breath. "There are older tales, forbidden ones, whispers of ancients who glimpsed things beyond the veil of consciousness. Some say they hear faint hymns echoing through the void. Others claim they sense shifts in the Astronomicon, as though feeling the Emperor's distant presence through their entombed existence." His companion scoffed under his breath. "Superstition, perhaps, but explain the awakening of ancient Korvax 2 centuries ago. No battle, no alarms, no threat, yet he activated fully, roaring through the sanctum as though summoned by something only he could perceive. That was a malfunction, was it?" The silence that followed was uneasy. The machine spirit within me pulsed, faint but perceptible, as though acknowledging the mention of its kin. I could not tell whether its reaction was one of dismissal or agreement. Despite my reluctance, awareness pulled me closer to wakefulness. The voices grew sharper, the sensations more distinct. My own thoughts, still blurred from the erosion of time, flickered in disjointed patterns. Who was I? What remained of me? Had I truly begun to sense things beyond the world of metal and war? Or was it only the slow degradation of a mind stretched across centuries, and battles unnumbered? As if in answer, another voice entered the sanctum, deep, resonant, wrapped in authority. The chaplain. "You speak boldly of matters you do not comprehend," he intoned, his presence like a gravitational force settling upon the chamber. "Dreadnoughts are not conduits to the divine. They are warriors bound by sacred duty. Respect their sacrifice. Do not mythologize their suffering." A pause. Then, more softly, he added, "But do not dismiss the mysteries that surround them either. In the Imperium, truth often wears the mask of rumor." His footsteps approached my dormant form. I could feel his proximity through faint shifts in temperature and the soft crackle of his armor's power cells. He placed a hand upon my sarcophagus, and though I could not feel the touch physically, something stirred within me. "Rest, ancient," he murmured. "Your burden is great. Let the galaxy turn without you for a time. Rest." A word that no longer held meaning. Still, I drifted again, sinking deeper into the nebulous twilight of slumber. But now, the whispers of the sanctum followed me inward, shaping themselves into indistinct impressions that hovered at the edge of consciousness. A flicker of gold, a distant hum, like a choir singing through a vast cathedral, a sensation of warmth barely remembered. Were they memories, imaginings, echoes of some long-forgotten campaign? Or something else entirely, some whispered rumor that had seeped into my fractured mind and taken root? I could not tell. I only knew that when the next awakening came, I would no longer be certain whether the world around me was the true battlefield or merely another layer of illusion woven by time, machine, and whispered belief. For in the dark between battles, identity dissolves, and in that dissolution, something else takes shape, something ancient, something unknowable, something waiting. There comes a moment in every long, slumbering mind where time ceases to feel like a river and instead becomes a great ocean, immense, indistinct, stretching outward into horizons without beginning or end. In those depths, the boundaries between memory and imagination blur, and one must decide whether to cling to what remains or simply allow the currents to carry everything away. For me, entombed in my iron sarcophagus, sustained by systems older than some of the worlds we fought upon, the ocean had grown boundless. The faint flicker of what had once been my identity drifted somewhere within it, small and faint as a lantern swallowed by the tide. It was in this drifting state that I first sensed the change. Not a sound, not a vision, not even a mechanical stimulus. It was a pull, subtle at first, then unmistakable, a shifting of weight within the unseen fabric of existence. Something stirred across the gulf of space, a distant tremor, like the faintest ripple skimming across the skim surface of the great ocean of time. I did not know whether it came from outside the sarcophagus or from deep within the recesses of my fractured consciousness. It might have been nothing more than a fragment of memory colliding with another fragment, creating a jolt where none should exist. But it felt real, and it felt vast. Before I could grasp its meaning, reality intruded. This awakening came not with alarms, but with a slow, solemn ignition of dormant systems. A gentle warmth seeped into my neural sockets as power flowed through conduits with reverent reluctance. The darkness of slumber did not shatter, it unfolded, like banners slowly unfurling in a silent chamber. The machine spirit stirred as well, not with its usual hunger, but with a subdued rumble that reminded me of an old predator rising after a long night. Something was different this time. I felt the presence of figures moving through the sanctum, their steps measured and heavy with importance. The sensors fed me faint impressions as my vision systems calibrated glimmers of candlelight, the flicker of purity seals, the barest outline of armored forms arranged in ceremonial posture rather than the frantic movements of warriors preparing for war. A voice rose, deep and resonant, wrapped in the gravity of ritual. "Ancient, hear us," the chaplain intoned. "For centuries you have borne the burden of service, awakening only when the need was dire. Today, the need is greater still. Centuries." The word fell with less impact now, numbed by repetition. But the tone in his voice was different, neither sorrowful nor triumphant, but weighed down by a solemn acceptance. My vision resolved into clarity. The sanctum had changed since my last awakening. New inscriptions decorated the walls, carved by the hands of brothers I did not know. Trophies from campaigns I had never fought adorned the alcoves. The faces of the warriors gathered around me were unfamiliar, all of them younger than those I remembered, yet older in bearing. Veterans marked by too many battles, leaders shaped by a world I had not witnessed unfold. The chaplain stepped forward, his skull helm reflecting the flickering lumen light. "Ancient, the Imperium trembles, shadows stir across the stars, worlds vanish without word. The Astronomicon flickers and brightens without pattern. Though we know not the cause, the omens weigh heavily upon us." His words resonated like distant thunder. Rumors, visions, and half-formed impressions from previous awakenings flickered through my mind. The whispers of tech marines, the quiet speculations of initiates, the murmured tales of chaplains speaking in half-lit vaults. It had always been easy to dismiss such things as superstition or ritualistic embellishment until now, as those same whispers seemed to ripple across my thoughts with renewed clarity. "Some among our order believe these disturbances to be mere warp storms," the chaplain continued. "Others speak of tides shifting in ways not seen since ancient days. But we do not claim certainty. We do not presume knowledge of such mysteries. We act only in accordance with duty, Duty. The one word that still stirred something familiar within me. The tech marines approached next, their steps firm, their servo harnesses humming with sanctified purpose. They did not speak. Their actions formed a prayer of their own. One adjusted the power couplings to my weapon mounts. Another affixed purity seals across my battered armor, each strip bearing fresh script. Another applied a final coat of sacred oil to the sarcophagus, tracing ancient sigils with steady hands. Then the chief tech marine spoke, his vox grill crackling. "We have reviewed the last 3 centuries of your service, Ancient. Of all our venerable brothers, you alone have endured each awakening with stable integration. The others..." He paused, but the silence spoke enough. "We ask much of you, more than we should." The machine spirit answered with a low, steady thrum. Not anger this time, not hunger. Something akin to grim acceptance. The chaplain nodded as if acknowledging the reaction. "Your sacrifice continues," he said. "But know that you do not bear it alone. We stand with you, as we always have." I wanted to believe him, wanted to reach through the haze of time and feel again the camaraderie of brothers beside me. But those memories flickered, fragile and unreliable, dissolving even as I tried to hold them. As the activation rites continued, I felt myself rising from the cradle once more. My immense form ascended with a controlled, deliberate grace that belied its monstrous mass. The ground vibrated beneath my steps. The young marines parted reverently, forming a path that led toward the sanctum gate. And then, unexpectedly, the chaplain stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Before we go to war," he murmured, "there is something you should know." My senses registered the faint tremor in his breath. "Some of our brothers believe that the Emperor watches over the interred more closely than the living. They claim the slumbering mind is closer to his light, that in the stillness, your spirit draws nearer to Terran grace." He paused. "I do not know if these claims hold truth. Some may simply be the hopes of men seeking meaning in tragedy. But I have witnessed you stir in ways unbidden. I have seen the walls of this sanctum tremble at your presence. And I have wondered." His words trailed into a silence that seemed to ripple outward. Was he seeking answers from me, or merely unburdening a fear he dared not share with others? He placed a hand upon my sarcophagus, and the gesture seemed to anchor his thoughts. "If you have seen something in your slumber, some vision, some flicker of truth, we would hear it." But I had no words to give, only impressions with no certainty, only fragments too faint to articulate. The ocean of my mind revealed no solid shore to stand upon. I remained silent. The chaplain exhaled softly, neither disappointed nor relieved. "Very well, then let us walk into battle with faith alone." He turned, signaling the opening of the sanctum gate. Beyond its threshold, the faint quiver of a distant bombardment trembled through the ship. The engines groaned as the cruiser adjusted course. The air carried the scent of ozone and battle readiness. Somewhere far below, the bulkhead sirens pulsed in preparation. The tech marines completed the final steps of activation. Vox links aligned, targeting arrays calibrated. My weapon systems hummed with restrained energy. The machine's spirit rose fully, its presence now vast and undeniable, yet still tethered by the fragile thread of what remained of my consciousness. As I stepped through the great gate, the sanctum fell away behind me like a receding dream. The corridors stretched before me, illuminated by harsh lumen strips, and marked with devotional engravings worn by centuries of footsteps. My massive strides sent echoes rolling down the passageways like thunder heralding a storm. But before I reached the embarkation deck, a flicker passed through my mind. That ripple in the ocean, a shape, golden light, a voice, distant, indistinct, calling through the void. I froze, if only for a fraction of a moment. My systems detected no anomaly, no psychic interference, no warp presence, nothing the sensors could quantify. But something within me, something human, recognized that flicker. A memory, a dream, a rumor given form, I did not know. The machine spirit murmured in agitation, urging me onward. Duty called, war awaited. The galaxy trembled under threats both known and unseen. I resumed my march, the lingering vision dissolving into the background like a whisper swallowed by the roar of engines. At the embarkation deck, Thunderhawks waited, their ramps lowered, their engines primed. Battle brothers filed in with disciplined urgency. They saluted me. As I approached, their expressions shaped by reverence and resolve. To them, I was a guardian older than their grandfathers, a silent sentinel awakened only when the world itself hung in the balance. As I stepped onto the reinforced loading bay, a moment of clarity settled upon me, unexpected, fragile, incandescent, not a memory, not a vision, simply the realization that for all the centuries of erosion, for all the fragments lost to time, for all the whispers that suggested my humanity was fading, I still felt something, not hope, not fear, something quieter, something shaped by the weight of endless duty and the faint, enduring spark of identity that refused to extinguish. The chaplain approached the boarding ramp, his voice rising in final benediction. Ancient, we go where war calls us. May the Emperor's light, however distant, guide your path. The engines roared, the deck trembled, and as the Thunderhawk lifted into the abyss of battle, I felt the distant ripple one. Last time subtle, elusive, impossible to grasp. Perhaps it was nothing, perhaps it was everything, but the war awaited, and I answered, for the burden of the eternal warrior is not to understand, it is to endure.